It's up front. Sign-in sheets up front. We're going to go ahead and get started. We can likely circulate the sheet as we need to. What? No. There's a spot right there. As of yet, it's difficult to start things on time over here, given how complicated it is for some to find the room. If you had a tough time finding the room, raise your hand. It took us weeks to figure out our way around. Well, some of us are better at these things than others. But don't be dismayed if it took you a little extra time to get to this room and to find us. It's all okay. We just about expect people to be late to various appointments and workshops here until everyone gets accustomed to coming back, which means you're a return customer. Welcome to another one of our PDS series. My name is Stacey Nickson, and I'm the Assistant Director here at the Biggio Center, for those of you that I have not met or had the opportunity to work with yet. We're glad that you've chosen to join us and look forward to the next 70 minutes that we have to try to learn as much as we possibly can about the topic. Okay, I want to just very quickly ask a few questions. What topic-wise, not fulfilling other requirements, but what topic-wise made you interested in what we're talking about today? Okay, learning more about today's college students. What else? Yes, ma'am. Okay, looking for alignment and validation with what you think you see going on. What else?
Just seeing things through their eyes.
Okay. What are they thinking? How do they see this routine happening? All right. All of those things are going to happen that you just talked about. Hopefully you will be able to see some things that you have likely experienced given the data that we drew from. You'll see some things through their eyes, and this will happen. Okay. We're going to talk about Auburn University students' academic expectations in the classroom. The responses that we got from students were taken from what we call the Small Group Instructional Feedback, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more for those of you that aren't familiar with what we call the SGIF. We're going to utilize educational reform, the educational reform movement, as the context for the expectations. That is one of the things that will be slightly different about this particular presentation. There are many lenses through which you could look at students' responses to what they expect. This is the particular lens we're going to look through today, and you'll know more about why we're selecting this lens as the first lens through which we look through student expectations. And then we're going to talk about, finally, overcoming the gap, because we will notice that there tends to be a gap between what you may require as an instructor and what students expect or prefer. And you can use those two words interchangeably, expect and prefer, what they expect in a class. And we're going to talk about how we bridge that gap. We are in the beginnings, and this is a working title, of the Auburn Students' Expectations Project. You have to give everything a name of some kind. And what that project consists of is analyzing data for small group instructional feedbacks, which are formative assessments that we conduct here. I'm going to talk more about SGIFs. We're then going to look at education reform as a factor of our students' expectations. We're going to talk about other factors, but this is the factor that we're going to focus on. We're going to take a look at decades of school reform very briefly and look a little more specifically at No Child Left Behind, which has had what seems to be the biggest impact on our students. Then we're going to talk about some particular AU students' experiences using their own words, the actual words that we recorded from their small group instructional feedback. And then we're going to talk about the implications of those expectations for college teaching and learning. How does it impact what you are teaching, how it is received, what they are learning, whether there's a connect or a disconnect, and what we can do about that. Limitations. There are limitations in addition to time for what we're going to speak about today. First limitation is the basis of this project is something called the Small Group Instructional Feedback, which is an anonymous process. And so there are things that cannot be revealed as we discuss these items. For example, which professor is being referred to in comments, what particular class we're talking about, who the student was that made the comment. Those types of things have to remain anonymous. We're also limited by the fact that those that contributed to this project engaged in a voluntary process. So it's not as though we have studied every class at Auburn University. In order to be included, you had to first volunteer to do a small group instructional feedback. We're limited by the small group topics that students chose to discuss. As you'll see, it's an open-ended process, open-ended questions, and so we did not dictate what topics they would choose to respond on. We're also limited by the course levels, which is once again dictated by that voluntary process. The findings we're going to present today come from phase 1 of this project, which is a sampling of the total. I'll give you some numbers that indicate the total scope of the project, and then I'll give you the numbers that indicate what sample we have used for today. Any questions so far? Okay, as I said, this is the data collected from small group instructional feedbacks, which are conducted by Auburn consultants. So there probably, since 2008, have been about 7, would you say, consultants that have gone out and done these. These consultations aren't by one person. They're done between 2008 and 2012. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to assess the preliminary findings that we have on the students' expectations, and we're going to discuss educational reform as a factor. That's the focus of phase 1. What is an SGIF? It's a formative evaluation. A Biggio Center consultant goes into a classroom, and we, with the teacher absent, ask students what is going well so far in the class, what suggestions do they have for improvement, and any additional comments they may have. Students form into groups of 4 or 5. They answer these questions. When they are done, we reconvene the entire class and we discuss their responses. We collect those responses, bring them back to the office. They're tabulated and typed. And then the Biggio Center consultant has a discussion with the professor about the results. And we talk about possibilities for changes, things that can't be changed or they choose not to change, what they become aware of that they perhaps did not know, what they knew that they wanted validated. And those are the types of discussions we have around that. How many of you have had an SGIF conducted on your class? Okay. Just one? Great. What's that? We did not pay him. He got nothing more than a cookie like the rest of you, but we sure appreciate it. No, it takes 30 minutes. It's a 30-minute process. And we can do it at the beginning or the end of your class. And we've done them in the classes that are 50 minutes or the classes that have extended amounts of time. Okay. But we get good feedback, which usually I think most people find it worth the time. We have lots of repeat folks. There are people that I know I've seen on the SGI list every semester that I've been here. So, okay. You have index cards on your table. Individually, I want you to tell me the 3 topics you think students discuss when they answer those open-ended questions. What is going well so far in this class, and what suggestions do they have for improvement? What do you think are 3 topics that students discuss when they're responding to that? I want you to write your answers individually on a card, and then you're going to discuss them at your table. And we've got just a few minutes to engage in this process. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can students give you feedback? They can give you feedback about any encounter that you've had. For example, you're going to give me feedback, and you're only with me 70 minutes, and I may never see you again. But it's going to be valuable for me, and it will be valuable for you also. All right, at this point, you should be discussing at your tables what your answers were to the 3 topics. It's okay. Now, what excludes you?
I'm not a professor.
You're what?
I'm not a professor. I'm just something the student centers. I have an operation.
Uh-huh.
Just to see if I can pick up little things that we as building specialists can help the students out around the building.
Okay.
Do what they do.
Okay.
Not mess up and stuff like that.
Okay. But you're still involved.
Yeah, we're
But I don't have a classroom.
You don't need to have a class. What do you think kids care about in the classroom?
it's hard in a lot.
Think about
Learning.
learning. What else?
Getting educated.
Okay. What do you think they worry about when they come new into a class?
Yeah, whether it's
There you go. Make sure they know that. You're involved. My motto is, if you pay taxes, you're involved.
I'm not trying to be ugly, but we want to come pick up their trash off the table. And that's what I'm saying.
it's not if you don't understand.
That is part of the concern that we have too, is how those characteristics have changed. And that's part of the expectations that have changed as a society for students to do those kinds of things.
Well, it's something we look down there. And in this, this probably, I'm playing 10 to 15 building specialists.
Yeah.
And everyone I've
Yeah, I
got
know.
different
It's
stuff like
hard.
that. But
I have such a
my theory
variety
is,
of sizes.
you don't do anything down there that you
There's
do.
definitely
That's right.
an atmosphere.
Just like
It's across the board.
if you suffer at your house with your mom and dad,
I have to sort of how far along.
and mom has made you put up the table
Mhm.
for 16, 17 years, you do it all the first.
Same thing. All the way around.
Yeah.
They always wait.
Okay, hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to contribute a little something to the conversation. And I'm going to apologize at the onset for having to push us through. As I started putting this material together, thinking that, okay, I'm really going to limit what we're going to talk about. And even limiting what we're talking about, I realized that 75 minutes was just not sufficient. So if I have to push along a little bit, I hope when this is done that we all decide we want to take this data further, we want to explore further this topic. And perhaps we'll get a chance to come back and do some more work with this. In the meantime, give me some ideas of what your table came up with regards to what the three topics are that students discuss when they're talking about the prompts that we give them. What are some of the things you came up with? Okay, grading. What else? Okay, their availability. What else? Okay, lecture or teaching. What else? Homework. What else? The pace of the class. All right. Kind of rolled in with the teaching aspect and the lecture aspect. Okay. Yes, ma'am? Okay. How do you think they would discuss that? Okay. Okay. All right, so distraction. All right. Anything else? Class rules, the structure of the class, the organization of the class. Okay. Most common student response topics. These are the things we see over and over again. They talk about homework. They talk about quizzes, specifically quizzes. They talk about exams and they talk about the tests. Study guides and test review are a hot topic. Teaching and all the elements therein, from the lecture style to someone mentioned pace and all of these other things. They talked about teaching styles. They talked about your PowerPoints and the notes, by whatever means those notes are distributed. And of course, they talked about grading. These are in no specific order. They are not weighted. These are just the 7 most recurring, most common topics when given a prompt that they came up with. Okay, I'm going to shift gears very slightly and very quickly because We are going to discuss those 7 items that you saw, the 7 most common things that occur. And we're going to discuss overcoming those. But there are other elements of teaching and learning that have an impact, a significant impact on students that are not going to be covered by what we talk about. One of the formative assessments that we recommend is Dr. Bill Busk's teacher behavior checklist. And in that checklist, he talks about a lot of the things that some of you brought up, like teacher availability, different aspects of teacher attitude, their responsiveness towards students, a lot of affective things, and a lot of other factors. We want to pass that list around to you so that you have that to reference. It is a wonderful thing to look at and check yourself against. It is also something that you can ask your students about. If you're brave enough to ask them, how well do I respond to you? Am I available? Am I really there for my office hours? Do they really accommodate you? So we wanted you to have that and put that as part of the reference materials that you have. It also gives you some idea of some of the types of resources that are available through the Biggio Center. So we may have things that match what you need or what you're thinking about, but you didn't know they were available, so you didn't ask for them. So we wanted to make sure that you had that and that you understand that we understand that those items also go into your effectiveness as a teacher, that it's not just limited to the things that we're going to talk about today. Any questions? Good. This checklist is wonderful in helping you to modify any behaviors that you would like to modify. Okay. Our ASEP project, total data. Since 2008, we have done SGIFs in 173 courses. 5,874 students were represented in those SGIFs. These are the colleges that participated, meaning we did SGIFs in every one of these colleges. And that includes our professional schools, our honor college, and our graduate school, which sometimes don't come to the forefront of people's minds unless they're involved in those schools. So you will see that all 14 colleges, when it comes to our total sample, were included, our total data were included in this. Course level distribution. These are the numbers of SGIFs we did based on course level. You will notice that there have been SGIFs done in every course level that we have. You will notice that the 3,000 level courses are at least 2 to 1 or almost 2 to 1 over the next closest. Any comments about course level distribution? Any thoughts? Mm-hmm. That may be part of the thinking of some people, but there are others that are aware that we do in-class SGIFs for large classes. I think we've done them for as large as 300. We do have another process to accommodate that, but it is possible. But that could be part of folks' thinking. The data we're going to look at today was taken across that same span of years. We pulled out 22 courses representing over 1,000 students. Bless you. 10 schools represented. Course level distribution. covered the course levels pretty well in those 22 classes. Class size distribution. We went from 3 classes that were under 20 students to we had a class that was up to 235 students, was the largest class that's included in this data set. All right, now that we've gotten that done, did we have any questions about the numbers I just gave you? Okay. One of the reasons phase 1 is a sampling is because there is so much disaggregation that's going to have to go on with this data, and it covers so much that currently there's only about 1 1/3 of us working on this. And this is something our whole center is going to become a part of, this project. And so as we have more time, we'll be able to do more with more data. Okay. Let's talk about some of the factors that shape students' expectations. I want you to look at the ones that are up there and tell me, if you can, how any one of those could go into shaping the students' expectations. Okay. All right. The rapid advancement of technology and what students are experiencing and how it may impact their patients. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Does any Red Bull? Okay. Lots of high energy, sugary, caffeine substitute. Okay. We drank coffee in college back in my day, but we didn't have Red Bull. Come on in, Connie. We didn't have tons of stuff to hype us up. Maria, you said something about the diet? What about their diet? Okay, dieting. Okay, they focus on 1,000 different ways to lose 82 pounds in 4 days. Okay. Just the nutrition. Right. This wasn't necessarily connecting with this, but as you said, in the lower grades, we do see findings that point to that. Whereas you generally, although you do have starving graduate students, you generally don't have your starving college student at Auburn. We don't see much of that around here. Any other comments about these factors? Globally, people raising the level of the education that their students have, it has an impact across the globe. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Before, and that is just, it makes
Okay. You do have the duality of the parents putting pressure on the student and the parent putting pressure perhaps on you to address their students' needs, especially the need to get an A. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. I want to put this caveat out here right now and just wipe this slate clean. We have no political agenda with this, okay? And this is not a judgment. Anything that you see about who and what Auburn students are, who and what Auburn professors are, or anything like that, okay? I think what you're saying is that's a whole nother topic that I have had repeatedly, especially within the domains of certain schools, where they will tell you 20 years ago, if you couldn't cut the math that would allow you to be an X, then you don't become that. And that there are many forces that are now saying, but you've got to make a way for that kid to have a chance to do that. And there is legitimate debate on both sides, but then what do we do in our classrooms to handle this? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is where a lot of these things intersect with one another. What they're eating and what they're drinking, combined with the technology, combined with something else, you've got these short attention spans, you've got all kinds of things like that intersecting and going on. Okay, this is a topic we could do a whole PDS on. We need to make notes of all the stuff that we could do whole PDSs on just about. But I wanted to put those out there because we do recognize that there are many factors that shape the students' expectations. Very quickly, if we could take a look at the recent educational reform movements, and we'll talk just a little bit more about this one in particular. Education reform has gone on as long as education has gone on. Right? There have always been reforms. And for some of you to call this recent is a stretch. But for some of us, this is recent, and these elements do connect. And if you connected the dots backwards, they continue to connect all the way to the beginning of education, but we just don't have time to go through that many different movements. As a refresher, for some of you that may not be aware, when you start to look at the 80s and our reform movements, you had President Reagan, who commissioned something called A Nation at Risk, and then you had President Bush the first, who ended up with something called America 2000. A Nation at Risk was a study that pretty much told us that we were falling off an educational cliff, that our country was in serious trouble, that kids weren't learning the kinds of things they needed to learn. Between Reagan and Bush, the recommendations were that we pay more attention to curriculum and standards, that students spend more time in school, that they spend more time doing homework, that teachers are better educated and better trained. The one place that A Nation at Risk missed the boat was they focused on high schools and the reforming of high schools. And they didn't give a lot of thought to the impact of elementary and middle schools. All right, moving on. You get to Clinton. Now, if you go back to Bush in America 2000 said we need to have national goals. They gave money for people to form committees so that the United States would have national goals. How many of you come from countries where there's a national curriculum for either the high school or the secondary school. When I say a national curriculum, I mean there's a committee that determines if you're in algebra, this is what you have to learn. Okay? How many of you come from countries where they have national exams that go with that? Okay. Is there anyone in here from another country that doesn't have those? You know. You would know if you had those. Okay, I want you all to just keep a light of that point and what we just discovered in this group. So, they said we're going to come up with some voluntary national goals. One of my colleagues was on that committee. Then you get to Clinton. Clinton says, oh, that's a great idea, national goals. Then there was a political fight. Vice President Cheney's wife got in it and said that national goals were akin to communism and socialism, and we shouldn't have those. And so you had a whole line of people that backed her also and said they didn't like the idea of national goals. Clinton backed down and said we'll have voluntary standards amongst the states. They can pick whatever they want. So this is kind of where we ended up in the 90s. We ended up with some people having strong standards, not many, and some not having standards at all. This was all voluntary. When you take something from being required to it being voluntary, that's one of the things that's going to happen. Some people aren't going to do it. But this became a very hot political issue. And so people didn't know whether to do it or not to do it. You move forward to President Bush's No Child Left Behind. This was a huge shift in how we think about education. This was the movement towards accountability and choice. And Obama's race to the top, which I believe was implemented in 2010, is really No Child Left Behind too. Okay? You can do what you want to with it. They've offered people waivers, but they've also offered you money if you will have unlimited amounts of charter schools and other things that are still from No Child Left Behind. So that kind of takes us through reform movements for about 40 years on the quick and dirty. What's important to us is the No Child Left Behind. Signed into law in 2002, no curriculum standards. All about scores, standardized tests, accountability, and choice. That's No Child Left Behind in a nutshell. You'll teach basic skills, you'll get higher test scores every year, or you'll be punished or closed. That's No Child Left Behind. What happened? Once you start thinking about your students, locally, principals and districts encourage the teachers, teach certain kinds of questions that are going to be on the test. Drill in the skills they need to answer the questions. Make sure that you mirror the questions that are going to be on the test. Do not focus on teaching subject mastery. Focus on getting them to get the right answers to the test. Teach very narrowly to the test objectives. Don't worry about the broader skills. So don't worry about whether they're going to be able to take X amount of information and apply it to Y. And make sure you teach very closely to the scoring rubrics that are going to mirror what is going to be on the test. Got it? Yes, sir. I was trying not to age myself. I was a part of the school system through all of those movements that I put up there. I was a secondary principal during No Child Left Behind and before. This was reality for every administrator that I encountered. And the only way you could fight against this is to come up with a dual system where you were able to do the great teaching and try to do this, which was just about impossible. Okay? But the things that I'm presenting to you are not anecdotal. They're from the research. I just back them up with the 25 years that I spent dealing with this. Unintended consequences. They focused on math. They focused on reading. Forget about history, science, other subjects. Finally, when they wove in some of the other exams, they didn't make the exams even worthwhile. It wasn't as though students still had to learn history to an extent that it made a difference. And you'll notice the handout that I gave you about AP courses, No Child Left Behind had an impact on the AP courses also. So it would be nice if we could sit back and say, well, our Auburn students come from good schools. Our Auburn students took AP courses. Okay. Students were left with an inherent inability to generalize new information. If you teach them something new and then you ask them to apply it to something that they've never factored in or thought about, that's now called a trick question. This is one of the gurus of No Child Left Behind. She was with both of these administrations. She pushed No Child Left Behind all over this country year after year after year. Finally, in 2009, she came back and said, in retrospect, No Child Left Behind was the worst education legislation ever passed by Congress. This narrow-minded definition of success served mainly to encourage narrowing of the curriculum, gaming the system, and teaching to bad tests and cheating. What does this have to do with you? Let's take a look at our Auburn students. Anybody teach freshmen? Okay. They were involved with No Child Left Behind from second grade to graduation. If you have sophomores, third grade, on and on and on. Graduate students, some of which are in this room. If you graduated between 2002 and 2008, in descending order, this is the amount of time you spent exposed to No Child Left Behind, unless you were an international student or you were engaged in a highly selective private school somewhere that did not deal with this. All right, let's talk about what Auburn students expect. Homework. These are actual statements. They are not outliers. These are specific statements that have been replicated many times over, just using different words. What is it that they expect? The homework's not helping me study for the quiz. Be more consistent so those things line up. Homework, too time consuming. We're not supposed to have to spend that much time on homework. I want homework problems that are going to be similar to the test questions. Otherwise, why am I doing it as a homework problem? Quizzes. We want you to put more emphasis on what we need to know for the quizzes. And I need to be told what days the quizzes are going to be on. Pop quizzes? No. Quizzing on reading is not a good way to test our knowledge. Think about that. Let's look at exams and tests. Could you please add some multiple choice or true-false tests to the questions? It would be good to know how many chapters, or how many questions are from each chapter, and then point out the important aspects or the points of that. Tests are straightforward, don't have anything on them that we have not covered in class. With regards to the exams and testing, I want you to think back to the points I put on the board about what teachers in K-12 were locally expected to do. What connections do you see between those two things? Julie? Okay, they have spent years being prepared for exams. What else? Okay, instead of being taught a curriculum, there you go, she's got another one. They've been told, we're going to learn 1, 8, 9, and 15. And that's going to be your U.S. history. We had it broken down from the very beginning, from the first time we ever saw the exam, to the point where every one of my teachers that taught math knew there are going to likely be 3 questions on probability, 2 questions on statistics. This is on a math test. 4 questions on whatever it is. And what I expect to see you doing is focusing on those 5 things that are going to represent the 9 questions that are going to be on the test. Until they can do those perfectly, the rest of it, can't worry about it. Okay? Was it because I didn't understand education? No. It was because you were threatened with loss of employment and school closure if you could not continuously raise the exams. If that's the structure you set up for adults, then this is what you're going to deliver to kids. And this is what the kids are going to bring to you. Study guides. How many of you have heard about study guides? Called a magic pill. I need a study guide for the exam so I can make sure that material I study is relevant to the exam. Should I be studying anything that's not going to be on the test? Need better reviews for tests. I want an online study guide, just in case I can't make it to class. Could you give me the study guide 2 weeks before the test? I like these practice tests posted online. Practice tests posted online. All right, teaching. You need to narrow the focus. You're teaching way too much in this class. I want you to teach less. Start off on a much more basic level. Go slowly. Just teach the stuff that you're going to test us on. Don't teach things that aren't going to be on the test. This is not a needle in a haystack. I can find that same response over and over and over again throughout the SGIFs. PowerPoint notes. I want you to post the slides, and I want you to do it earlier. Don't do it the morning of class. Make sure I get them in plenty of time. And put some blanks in there in your notes so I can fill them in during class. And could I also get an outline of the notes? Grading. How many of you have felt that first one? Make it easier to get an A or a B. Raise your hand. I want some extra credit so I can get that A or B if you don't help me. Look at this last one. She does well in grading because she can perceive our reading levels through her method of testing. What does anyone think that they were meaning by that? Compensating and adjusting for their reading levels and their abilities. Now, this is not to say that what they have asked for is bad, what the teachers have or have not given is bad or good. This is just what has been said and just what is expected. All right, at your table, I want you to quickly discuss what are some of the implications for teaching and student learning at Auburn that may have resulted from No Child Left Behind.
Teachers give me this, do this, make it as easy as possible.
On the thing that's going to influence is grading inflation. I mean, to give a student a C, which means you're doing what is expected of you, you might put a dagger in it. That's the end of the world at the end.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I didn't even get to talk about was the fact that we kept lowering the threshold on the state exams because students couldn't pass them. And so they are used to you having to lower everything to inflate their grades. So kids run around saying that I did well on the standardized tests. Well, it wasn't much of a test. A monkey could have filled that test out. Doesn't make you a genius. They want the same thing in the classroom. How y'all doing back there? Mm-hmm.
Being the worst consumers around, and we're also going to pay for this education when you want to get this living that off. You don't want to one class. Get your aid and move on. If you don't care, get your aid and you're off to your
Well, have you had the talk from Provost about increased time it takes Auburn students to graduate?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. In a couple of minutes, we're going to do this activity, and each table gets a different color. Nope. One whole table gets green, one whole table gets purple in just a few minutes. Okay, we're going to reconvene. Give us some idea of what are some of the things that you came up with regards to the implications for No Child Left Behind with Auburn University students. What? Their focus is on scores, grading, and test scores. Seems to be a preponderance of the focus as opposed to knowledge acquisition. Yes, ma'am.
Train students with math, but of course what I'm trying to teach students is critical thought,
Mm-hmm.
solve problems, like new problems, and just because we did something in class, not the exact same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Use your
Okay. I'm not touching that one.
Can't understand what I can't think of politically apply what I'm doing to.
Yes. 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 Right. That is. That's right. Other things you came up with, other things that came from your tables. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. From what your concerns and teaching are?
No, the students.
Oh, the two students. Okay.
The student just, wants to like to do right on one hand, and another student says, I want to learn how to do so and so.
You have that going on also. Anything else? Okay, you are going to get a set of papers there. Everyone at your table, take one. On that paper, in the middle, are going to be 3 items filled out that talk about student expectations. You all have different ones, and they're all different than any of the ones that we've already discussed. There's so much to choose from here. What you're going to do is discuss the selected student expectation statement that is in the middle, sort of the middle column there. Everyone at your table has the same exact one. Then you're going to record the likely teacher requirement corresponding to their expectation, and you may use your own real example. So if the student expectation is to dumb down the class, what is the teacher's likely response for that first column? Is it to make the class easier? Is it to give them supplemental materials? Is it to make their office hours longer? What do they do in response to that? Or what have they done that probably prompted that expectation? And then finally, in the last column, together, I want you to try to develop some type of strategy to overcome the issue. In other words, you're going to try to create a bridge between the expectation and the requirement. Does anyone need us to do an example and work across one?
I feel already there is a vicious circle because as a teacher,
Uh-huh.
you are graded, so to speak, the same way as students.
Okay.
So of course I'm going to please my audience because I'm worried about my evaluation being less than 2.0.
Okay. All right. So part of that bridge, and one of the discussions I have in consultations all the time is, I do not believe you are being asked to give up your scholarly integrity in order to teach. So how do we help you maintain that scholarly integrity, but help the students get to the level that you are trying to get them to, or as close as possible, and do it in such a way that they are able to learn, have the best opportunity for the best grade that they can possibly earn. Okay? Come up with some ideas at your table, see what you come up with, and then in about 8 minutes, we're going to discuss what you came up with.
I have an idea because I have this problem and I'm not able to come up with any,
Which one?
well, in general, well, all things that you were showing right
Mhm.
now, it's the
Problems you're having.
comments that I
Mhm.
have in at the end of our
Mhm.
so I know that I don't know how to help them. I would like somebody to tell them that that's
Inappropriate?
We have, describe work for every single driver. They got just like I guess we're general maybe probably just to say that it covers more information like the test does. Well, then it says it should be moved around. I was wondering if that meant that the homework is easier and the tests are too specific in detail.
Yes, and they wanted the homework to be more detailed than make the test easy.
Make the test easier.
Yeah. So we can have hard homework, but when it comes to tests,
Because then they
make sure I can get the grade. Right. So one of your solutions could be, okay, we'll make the test easy, but we'll make the homework worth more. Yeah, would you like that?
I've actually never got that.
The rest of the exams are identical.
You know, PowerPoints are interesting because a lot of times the PowerPoints focus on just regurgitating what was in the book and talking about topics. So really what we should be telling the students in this homework is you need to do the reading and understand the top terms, and the PowerPoint should be more application or applying it. Does that make sense? Yeah, but what we tell them is most likely they have not read that material, they'll probably write it for the exam. So I tell you what we'll do, we'll spend the hour and I'll just regurgitate it.
And that's kind of their expected pattern.
Thinking of a PowerPoint, the class is providing you a different perspective than the textbook. And at some point, I'm sure the textbook explains that much better than I do, and on some other topics, it might be the exact opposite. So I do want them to read the text before. Sometimes do, sometimes don't. And then do it a little bit different. Hopefully, they get one of
Okay, we're going to come back together at this time. I heard some really healthy discussion at our tables. One of the things that I came to realize in consulting with professors after their SGIFs, teaching is a solitary profession, and those things that we are good at, we're pleased about, and we're willing to share. Those things that are giving us trouble, we quite often don't have the space or people to safely connect with and talk about, I am having some real issues with this, because we don't want to give away our hand. And we play it close to the vest, especially if you're trying to keep a job, get tenure, not make people have doubts about your abilities as a professional. And so these are the reasons we don't get many things solved, not because there are no answers, but because we don't have the environment and the space in which to take care of them. And one of the things that I enjoyed hearing was just you getting an opportunity to talk about some of these things. Would anyone like to give us an example of a problem they had and something they came up with to possibly overcome that issue? Connie?
think it is fine, whatever, but I want to know, I actually, in my grading test, don't get that much time to think. A lot of my questions are open-ended. But, given all that, the criticism from students is that they want it to be laid out for them in black and white, exactly what you expect. Maybe we, the bridge, we might be. Be sure that what it is, I think it's important for me.
Bingo, grand prize. Mhm. We walk into the classroom with a lot of expectations of our own about what you have learned, who you are, and what you're capable of doing, and the fact that you know you're in college and this is what I'm going to expect. And I put a little note about it in the syllabus. I expect essays that reflect critical thinking. Well, what that means to you and what that means to them are two different things. And so we perhaps need to spend more time talking about it, give them a little more detail on the syllabus, and keep it as an ongoing reminder as we grade their work, as we discuss their preparation to submit their work, as we go through a first draft, repeatedly going over the expectation until they become attuned. Think about it. This whole process that No Child Left Behind gave them, they had to be taught that. I have yet to encounter a student that came in the second grade and said, "Teacher, I want a Scantron." That's not natural or normal. We had to teach them to be dysfunctional. And just as we taught them that, I believe that there are ways to overcome that. One of those is the level of communication you're going to have. And that starts with your understanding of where they are. And to warn you, the chart you saw about where your freshmen lie on that, right? We've got another 3 or 4 years for sure that's going to continue to happen. And then after that, who knows what's going to happen. So the word to college professors is always keep an eye and an ear on what you're being fed and what was put into it. That'll let you know a lot about where you need to go with that aspect of the conversation. Could we get one more?
For example, with respect to critical thinking, then you don't have pop quiz in class where you mark true or false. But like in my case, when I have discussions in my classes, it's all discussion, whether it's oral or in writing. So with discussions in class, they write a reflection, and then they final exam is going to be exactly the same thing.
Consistency. You note, both of these methods of bridging and overcoming, not one of them required the teacher to change their scholarly perspective or their expectation. They're both certain levels of communication and what you're conveying to students. All right. I wish we had more time to practice with more of these and to discuss them. A couple of things. Number one, at the Biggio Center, when you engage in SGIFs, the things that we talked about here are the types of information we pick up from your class. And when we sit down as consultants with you, we go over what students' expectations were and give you an opportunity to reflect upon what were you asking for, what do you expect. And then as consultants, we try to help you create the bridges you will need to overcome these issues. We also have a resource library. We've got a website with tons of information. We have our consultants. We do things like these seminars, our workshops. We also have resources for our GTAs and other things. So this is a place to come, a safe place to come to overcome some of those things. Yes, sir.
everybody else can as well, and FDS especially.
Some final closing thoughts. I want you to think about whether or not, since this session began, have your perceptions of Auburn University students' expectations been enhanced? And when I say your perceptions, just the breadth of knowledge you have about the sources of their expectations and the impact. What can you do to bridge the gap between your requirements and your students' expectations? And what role can formative assessment play in improving your teaching and your students' learning? Thank you all so much. Please fill out your green evaluation forms. We take the information to heart. If you say this was poppycock, we'll never do it again.
Presentation is for them to have keywords. And I actually called myself just using the same word in the question that I had in the PowerPoint. So for them were head easy and they were all happy, and then I thought, no, that was not helpful for them. They never understand. So it would be helpful just to tell them, do not expect me to use the same word at the beginning.
Yes.
A manner of telling them do not expect.
And tell them why. Because they need to understand the 5 different words that could be associated.